Have you ever had a drop of water fall on you in a place where it's unlikely or next to impossible? Posted in the Glitch in the Matrix subreddit by Darth Data D20. Something that has happened to myself randomly, maybe twice in my life. But the other day, sitting at home with my son, who is under a sheet of the bed, suddenly flinches and goes, "Water hit me." I look, and sure as day, he has a drop of water on his cheek next to his eye. Then I think to look to the ceiling, and of course there is no water dripping there, nor any rain outside. Then I think, hey, he was just covering his head with a sheet. Surely it would have hit the sheet and not his face. Then I'm reminded of the few times I've had mystery water from some other dimension appear dropped on my face. The best advice I never received. Posted in the Glitch in the Matrix subreddit by Built on Glass. This happened about 7 years ago when I was 14 years old. This is my first time posting and I feel like it's quite lengthy, so bear with me. My dad always came home late from work. He was a restaurant owner and would be in the basement with a beer and his dinner to watch ESPN highlights on the flat screen. I was a light sleeper and would sometimes join him downstairs to watch TV and steal some of his food. This particular night was no different, apart from the fact that I didn't get the usual scolding for being up so late on a school night. He also wasn't sitting in his favorite recliner, which I found odd but didn't linger on. Instead of our usual chit-chat, he began asking me questions about my future, specifically what I wanted to study in college. I told him I wasn't really sure, maybe journalism or something with writing. He nodded and seemed a little disappointed, and this was the first moment I realized he looked quite different than usual. There were subtle differences in his face that made him seem older, his features a little more gaunt. His eyes, in particular, struck me as odd. They seemed angrier and darker than I remembered. I then noticed that the room itself seemed a little bit off. Everything seemed vaguely distorted in ways that I couldn't exactly place. I thought our TV looked different, so much that I almost asked him if he'd gotten a new one. I think he saw the look of vague confusion in my face because he turned his head away, but continued to talk about my future. He asked me if I'd considered a career in technology. It had never crossed my mind, and I had answered honestly. He nodded again with that disappointed look, telling me that I should really consider it. I asked why he was suddenly interested in tech, knowing that he was pretty illiterate when it came to computers. He told me that it was the future, and that before I knew it, our entire world will be controlled by engineers. I asked him what he meant, but he didn't elaborate. He still wouldn't look directly at me, looking at the football highlights on TV for most of the conversation. He told me I had talent, whether I realized it yet or not. I laughed, joking that knowing how to set up his email didn't make me an engineer. He didn't laugh, instead telling me again that I should look at technology as the focal point of my future. He started rambling about what the world could be if the right minds applied themselves. And all of this other rhetoric that seemed way too progressive for his old school upbringing. He was stern in tone, almost lecturing me on the importance of it all. He told me to give it 7 years, then I'd see what he was talking about. I don't remember much else, just him repeatedly bringing up software engineering. I remember liking the way it sounded all of a sudden, getting to call yourself an engineer. I woke up on the couch later that night, probably close to 4 a.m., lights and TV still on. My dad was gone, which I found odd. He normally would have woken me up, or at the very least turned the TV off. I made my way upstairs a little groggy, but clearly remembering the conversation my father and I had earlier that night. I poked my head into my parents' room. They were both in there fast asleep. The next morning my parents were in the kitchen drinking coffee. I sat down on the counter and asked him why he left me in the basement last night. He seemed confused and asked me what I was talking about. I repeated myself, saying he left all the lights and the TV on and didn't bother to wake me. He told me he wasn't in the basement last night. I laughed, thinking he was messing with me. His face changed from confused to concerned as he made a side glance at my mom. She looked a little confused as well, asking me if I was sleepwalking. I said no, telling him we hung out in the basement for a solid hour last night. He told me I must have been dreaming because he went right upstairs to bed when he got home last night. I was getting a little annoyed, so I told him about the football game we watched with the highlights of. I remember him getting pissed at me for spoiling the game for him, saying he was going to watch the highlights later. My mom asked me if I was feeling okay, looking quite concerned at this point. In my final attempt to convince my dad of the events last night, I regurgitated some of the stuff he had told me about technology and software engineering. He was extremely confused, saying, "What do I know about techware engineering?" I was reminded of my dad's obvious tech illiteracy in that moment. Along with his confusion, it began to make me seriously doubt myself. I dropped the subject, saying I was probably dreaming. I thought about it for days afterwards, knowing it was too clear and specific to be a dream. Everything he said to me bounced around my head, and I started thinking about tech more and more. It didn't take long before I started learning to code, pursuing computer science for most of high school. I don't know who or what I talked to that night, but it was what convinced me to start a future in technology. I'm studying software engineering at a college in California, well known for its tech programs, specializing in deep learning. Yesterday, I got offered an incredible internship opportunity at one of the companies leading the charge with AI. I see some pretty grand opportunities for myself on the horizon post-graduation, and it makes me wonder if the person I talked to already knew that I'd end up at this point. He told me 7 years ago, and here I am, age 21, just getting started.